We're going to talk about dangerous dogs today. Very topical subject, obviously, with everything that's going on at the moment, and we'll touch on that as we go through. Obviously, I can't work the slides, so you'll have to do the marine. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about. A little bit about signs of aggression, because it's not just as simple as dogs that are growling and snapping. Who dogs bite and why they bite them. A lot about the law, dangerous dogs, legal definitions and so on. And then what we can do about prevention to try and stop this getting worse. Next one's marine. It doesn't need me, just go back one. Doesn't need me to tell you that that's an aggressive dog. It's very obvious, isn't it? But particularly in practice situations, we need to be much more aware of the signals that dogs are giving us if we're going to treat dogs in a manner that they want to be treated and to stop us getting bitten as well. Next one. So I don't know whether you may have seen this already. It's called The Ladder of Aggression. It was written by a lady called Kendall Shepherd, who's a very well-known behaviourist. And if you start at the bottom, what she's giving you here are the very lowest levels of a dog telling you that it's unhappy. Yawning, blinking, nose licking, those sort of activities. And as you work your way up that ladder, the signs become more and more overt. So turning head away, turning the body away, walking away. And of course, while in practice we're trying to do something with dogs, we need to be watching what they're telling us if we want to do it safely and easily, and most importantly, so that the dog feels happy about it. And of course, when you get to the top of the ladder, then you get to biting and snapping, and we all recognise that. But I think we're not very adept at recognising those lower levels of uncomfortableness that will eventually lead to aggression if we're not careful. So what actually causes aggression? Next one. And the next one. Right. So one of the common causes is fear, and of course, particularly with dogs that are in veterinary practices, a lot of them have had unpleasant experiences before, and so they are fearful of what's going on. And the mechanisms that we can do to control that, obviously, are socialization. We'll talk a bit about puppy parties later on. And of course, you have to be very aware of many of the dogs that we see in practice are in pain, and that can produce an aggressive reaction. Next one. Resource guarding is quite common. Some of the trainers out there will tell you very silly things like your puppy's got to learn to have its food taken away in case you ever want to do that. There are ways of doing that, but just taking the food away is likely to lead to resource guarding. Next one. Frustration can cause aggression. Dogs that really, really want to do something but are being prevented all the time will end up showing signs of aggression as a result. Next. What we're seeing increasingly is trained aggression. And again, we'll talk about this later because it's very relevant to everything that's going on at the moment. And of course, the way that we train animals is critical to all of this. We should be using training by reward, not training by punishment, even if we can avoid it, negative punishment. Next. I'm sure all be aware that there are medical causes potentially for aggression, particularly dogs that have had an epileptiform fit and are in that post-ictal stage. They do very often feel very strange, and aggression can result in that. You'll know also the behavioural implications of brain tumours that can also change temperament. And dogs that are just simply getting old, less aware of their surroundings, can easily be surprised, and their initial reaction is to turn and snap. That can have fairly dramatic consequences. Next one. You'll need also to be aware that dogs learn very quickly about the effectiveness of what they're telling the person. So a dog that has been into the vet several times and has done all those lower levels of saying, I'm uncomfortable with this, that we saw on the ladder of aggression, after that's happened a couple of times and nobody stopped doing whatever it was that the dog didn't like, they may well turn and snap without going through those initial warning phases that you would expect in most situations. So these are the dogs where you get the note on the dog's clinical record, careful bites. Well, they got to the biting stage because nobody thought about what they were doing when they were being treated beforehand. And the last one, of course, very topical, is breed and whether there really is any relationship with breed and aggression. There are clearly breed traits. It's very obvious that golden retrievers like walking around with something in their mouths. Mine is not happy unless she's got something in her mouth, just because that's what there's built into their brain. And you can argue that there are some dogs, the obvious candidates, GSDs, the guarding breeds, that may be more prone to aggression. But that proneness that is built into them genetically doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be aggressive. It's all down to the way that they're trained when they're young and that whole socialization period. So, how many dogs bite people and what happens? So let's go on to the next one. Roughly 300,000 people a year attend hospital because they've been bitten. That's clearly the tip of an iceberg because there are an awful lot of people who don't get treated in hospital, some perhaps treated by GPs. Quite a lot of those admitted, and a very high proportion of those are youngsters. And youngsters get bitten more often than not because they don't understand the dog's body language. But what we've seen recently and what's brought it into the newspapers and on the television is this increase in average deaths from 4 a year to 10 last year. And I think we're already up to 10 this year. So there is something going on which is leading to increased aggression in dogs and the consequence of that of people being bitten. So let's look at some comparisons. This is comparisons all over 10 years up to the mid-80s. The light green bar are the numbers being bitten in the late 90s. The dark green bars are those being bitten in the late 80s. And that trend has continued, as we'll see. And it's very obvious that there are an increased number of people being bitten by dogs in one way or another. And that is a reflection on the ineffectiveness of the current legislation. If we look at location of bites, the blue bars here are face bites related to age, and you'll see that the great majority of children under 11 are bitten round the head and face. And that, of course, causes fairly dramatic consequences for the child. It's inevitable because many of these children approach the dog with their head at the same height as the dog's head. They don't understand the dog's body language telling them to go away, and then they get bitten. And there's a simple answer to this, and that is supervision with children and dogs. And personally, I would never leave any dog ever with a child without some supervision there to prevent exactly these sort of things. I know my, well, he was little then, 18-year-old now grandson, at one stage thought it was really funny to chase our golden retriever around the house. And she was obviously not impressed by that. He had to be told in words of one syllable, that's not what you do. The dog has feelings, doesn't want to be chased any more than you would. So supervision of dogs around children is absolutely critical. What has changed, though, and this is very up-to-date figures, this is the last decade or so, 98 to 2018. The top line, the light blue line, is the numbers of children being bitten by dogs. And these are children attending hospital. And you see that it's broadly consistent across that decade. The red line is the number of adults being bitten. Now, there is a critical difference here in that the children are being bitten generally accidentally. And my feeling is that many of these adults are being bitten because somebody wanted the dog to bite them. And this is the use of dogs in general as weapons for people who are less likely to get arrested for taking a dog out than they are for carrying a knife, and feel that they need some sort of progression, use the dog as a status symbol. And I think that's a very clear indication of why the whole situation with dangerous dogs legislation has gone wrong, because dogs are being used as weapons. There is another factor in this, and that is social deprivation. If you look at the levels of social deprivation and relate it to numbers of dog bites, so what we have here is dog bites per 100,000 of the population. On the left-hand side, we have the most deprived areas, and on the right-hand side, we have the least deprived. And that's a very clear indication that this is not a dog problem, it is a social problem. The fact that people feel they have to take a dog out as a status and for their protection tends to happen, broadly speaking, in the more deprived areas. And if we look at that on a map, you'll see that the obvious areas, the darker the colour, the higher number of dog bites per 100,000. So the northeast, Liverpool, Manchester, the little square at the bottom is London. You can see the London boroughs that are affected. So that really simply shows us, all of that data, that this really is a social problem, and one that needs addressing from a social aspect rather than looking at the dog itself. So let's talk a bit about the Dangerous Dogs Act. It was introduced in 1991. It's the fastest that an act has been through the Houses of Parliament ever. It was passed from nothing to being enacted in 3 days. And the reason for it was that there'd been a number of fairly high-profile dog bite incidents on children, culminating in a little girl called Rukhsana Khan, who was playing in her back garden when the dog next door broke its way through the fence and did her some really horrific injuries. And this was the knee-jerk reaction then. This is particular breeds of dog that are doing this, particularly for pit bull terriers, who were the, if you like, the dog of the moment. So the premise for this was that if we get rid of all these pit bull terriers, the numbers of dog bites will go down and everybody will be happy. And the way to do that was not, thank heavens, to just go around and kill them, because there are an awful lot of very nice pit bull terriers out there. It was to neuter them, to stop them being bred from. And so the intended consequence was that if you neuter all these dogs, next one, Marine, if you neuter all these dogs, no more can be bred. Life expectancy of average 8 or 10 years, given that you've got a complete spread of the population. And so in a few years' time, we'll have none of these dogs out there because they've got to be muzzled, etc. We will reduce the numbers of dog bites. And you can see from the data I've showed you that that just has not worked I mean, there's no relationship between the two. The recent proposals, of course, because of the XL bully issue and because there have been a number of very high-profile dog attacks on people, is not to actually do what needs doing, but to add the XL bully. So what's the Act actually do? What it says is that any dog of the type may not be bred from, it can't be sold, can't be given away, can't be advertised. If you've got a bully, this is 1991. Sorry, if you've got a pit bull in 1991, you had it. And if at any point you needed to get rid of it, the only way to do that was to have it put to sleep. And you're not allowed to abandon it, allow it to stray, etc. And in addition to that, you must muzzle and lead in a public place. So dogs couldn't possibly bite somebody in a public place. They had to be microchipped. They had to have a specialist insurance. And there is a register of all these dogs. So we've neutered them, stopped them breeding. We've muzzled them so they can't bite anybody. And so we've solved the problem, was the theory. The breeds banned then were these four: the Pit Bull Terrier, Japanese Tosa, Fila, Braziliero, Dogo, Argentino. What they forgot at the time, and this is still an argument, is that none of these are breeds licensed by the Kennel Club in the United Kingdom. And so there is no breed standard for any of these breeds. So they simply said Pit Bull Terriers will be banned. And so you could have a situation where you could crossbreed a Staffordshire Bull Terrier and a Labrador that turned out, to somebody's opinion, to look like a Pit Bull Terrier, and therefore the dog was banned. The secondary nonsense of the Dangerous Dogs Act. They did eventually, after a High Court case, get round to actually writing standards for these dogs, and every police force now is supposed to have a dog liaison officer who has been trained to recognise those four banned breeds. And of course, now they're talking about banning an XL bully. They're back to square one again, trying to work out what an XL bully looks like, because it's not a registered breed in the UK. So they haven't learned that lesson either. So before 1997, there was an amendment to the Act in 1997, because all the welfare organisations, in addition to saying what you're doing won't work, also were outraged that the only possible solution for these dogs, if they were unwanted, was to kill them. So that was the only option, no ifs or buts. And if they ever got to court, they were killed. That was it. What the 1997 amendment introduced was the ability to add these dogs to the register and to put the same conditions on those additional dogs. So there was a whole process to do that. Essentially, the police seize a dog, they put it in kennels, and it then works its way through the court process. That court process, on average, takes somewhere between 10 months and a year. And you can imagine that if you lock a dog up in kennels for 10 months of a year, it is not the same dog behaviourally when it comes out again at the other end. So even though this allowed these dogs to live, many of them were psychologically damaged as a result of the experience they'd gone through. Just to give you an idea of the scale, only a few years ago, the Metropolitan Police were seizing 1,000 pit bull types a year and kennelling them, and spending literally millions of pounds kenneling these dogs for 8 to 12 months while the court process went through. The other thing, the good bit of the Dangerous Dogs Act was that it introduced the concept of being dangerously out of control. And dangerously out of control was defined in the Act like this. You go on to the next one, Marine. and again. That's it. So dangerously out of control only required somebody to be scared of the dog. Doesn't require the dog to actually have done anything. And one situation where some people are scared of dogs, and I was walking my golden retriever around Gunnersbury Park a few years ago, and there was a lady who was clearly scared of the dog. Maggie was off the lead and ran up to this lady who screamed and jumped on a bench. Now, technically, I'm guilty of an offence for doing that. Then there's the aggravated offence, when the dog actually has done some damage, and that might just be a scratch, but the penalty goes up significantly if the offence is aggravated. Sorry, can't get my words out. Next one then, Maureen. So that applied only in a public place. So whatever happened in a domestic situation did not apply to the Act. So we then had the silly situation where about a decade ago, a little girl called Laurence was killed by her uncle's pit bull terrier at 3:30 in the morning on New Year's Eve. And both the grandmother, who was in charge of the child and the dog at the time, and the uncle were charged. He was convicted of keeping a banned breed, and that was the only offence. That led to an amendment of the Act. So go on to the next one. We have the aggravated offence, and then this amendment in 2016. And what the amendment did was to redefine dangerously out of control. It's on the next slide. So what we're now saying is that a dog can be dangerously out of control anywhere. This only applies in England and Wales because of devolution. It's devolved in Scotland. So a dog could be dangerously out of control anywhere, including in a domestic premises. And the same offence or aggravated offence, but the aggravated offence now included assistance dogs, because the assistance dog community produced quite a large number of instances where their dogs have been attacked. So these are guide dogs for the blind, or hearing dogs for the deaf, and so on, and damaged these dogs. And of course, those dogs then, many of them had to be retired as working dogs, so very significant consequences for them, without actually damaging the person who was with the dog. So that makes a huge difference. The other thing that makes a difference is that you see now that both the owner of the dog and the person in charge of it are guilty of the offence. So that's not or, it's and. So if the owner gives an aggressive dog to somebody else to walk, and the dog is dangerously out of control, then both the owner and the person walking the dog are guilty of the offence. So that's a significant change. However, that causes a problem, of course. What happens if Burglar Bill breaks into your house in the middle of the night and you have a dog, and the dog not unreasonably bites Burglar Bill while he's burgling your house? So an additional clause was put in, which is this one, which says that Burglar Bill, who's jumped into your house, is if the dog bites Burglar Bill, the dog is exempt and it's not dangerously out of control. So that's the defence of the dog when the dog is guarding your house. It only applies to a domestic premises or forces accommodation. So it's a very limited one, but it does mean that your perfectly nice pet who not unreasonably bites a burglar who breaks in doesn't then get convicted. So that's the Dangerous Dogs Act as it stands. Penalties now are 2 years in jail and £20,000, so they are significant. But of course, this is all shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. What we should be talking about is prevention. And there are some bits of legislation that relate to prevention. So there are criminal behaviour orders, which are applied after a conviction for an offence. So, for instance, if a dog is being used as a status dog, as a weapon, and the owner is convicted, a criminal behaviour order can order that dog to be muzzled, no matter what breed it is, and various other penalties like that. A community protection notice is applied by a local authority where there's unreasonable behaviour. So this applies, for instance, where dogs are gathering with youths and being aggressive to people walking by us. So it applies to an area, whereas the criminal behaviour order applies to a person. And there are also public space protection orders. And these are the sort of things where local authorities can ban dogs from children's playgrounds, perfectly reasonable. Go on to the next one, Marine, and the next one. That's it. Persistent detrimental effect, as you would expect in a children's playground. Also, public places where people don't pick up after their dogs reasonably, those also can have dog bans put in place, and those are done by the local authority. So that's the legal prevention. What else can we do? Well, socialization and habituation, I'm sure you've all been told about. Animals learn when they're young, and what they learn when they're young it stays with them pretty much for the rest of their lives. And so a dog that grows up knowing that people come in different shapes and sizes, young, old, beards, hats, male, female, every variety. If they're introduced to people like that in a variety, in what's called this socialization period, so basically up to 12 weeks, then they learn that people are not a threat. The same applies to the washing machine, to the vacuum cleaner, to the food mixer, all of those things that make a noise that dogs will essentially be scared of, but can learn that they're not a threat. The importance of this is what happens in that socialization period, 3 to 12 weeks roughly for dogs, and it doesn't cut off at 12 weeks, but it's much less obvious after that. This is the importance of decent breeding. So a puppy that's brought up on a puppy farm in a cage with no social interaction other than with its litter mates until it's 8 weeks of age is going to behave differently to a puppy that's brought up in a family household with people around it, with things happening, with the television and the radio and the vacuum cleaner, all of those things. They will be habituated to those and they'll be fine with them. And because you can't sell legally a puppy until it's 8 weeks old, what happens with the breeder is really, really important. And it's really important then that these puppies that are acquired at 8 weeks of age, for that month you're getting to the end of the socialization period, that new owners are told about how to socialize and habituate their puppies to what's going on. And I know there's a conflict with vaccination dates and all the rest of that, but it can still be done because people can deliberately introduce the things that you want to habituate against. And so this is the importance of properly run things like puppy parties. Secondly, of course, how you train a dog is critical. Training by reward, so that the dog does things because they want to do the things, and they want to do it because it's part of their normal procedure. So recall, sit and stay, introduction to other people, so that, you know, if you've got a big dog, Granny generally doesn't want one foot on each shoulder and her face licked when she comes to stay. So all of those sort of training by reward, not using aggression and not using positive punishment. And of course, not using things like some of these horrible devices around the place, these prong collars, which are like a check chain, but with prongs that stick into the dog's neck. So when you pull it, it really hurts. Bark collars, which simply suppress a behavior. Electric collars, which hopefully we're just about to get banned. All of those things that are aversive shouldn't be used in training. And then we come to what happens in veterinary practices. An appropriate handling in practice is really important. Puppy parties. Properly run puppy parties where the puppies are controlled, they're allowed to socialize with each other in a controlled manner, are excellent for doing this socialization process. And they do need to happen. They need to start shortly after 8 weeks. So it takes a bit of organizing in practice, I know, but it's something that will pay dividends in the long run. Because those puppies now know coming into this veterinary practice that smells slightly odd, it is not aversive because they've got used to it. They will treat other dogs happily because they've met other dogs of various shapes and sizes, and they're quite happy doing that. All of that done, of course, by using reward, so that little tidbits given to puppies during this whole process it really works well. What they're not is an opportunity to sell worms and flea products. That might happen as a sideline, but that's not what puppy party's about. The other thing which has come into place fairly recently is dog-friendly practice. I'm sure all have heard of cat-friendly practice. Dog-friendly practice is the parallel. A little bit different because it's much less based on premises and design of premises, because it's less appropriate for dogs, but it does talk about the way that dogs are handled in practice, how you can do this habituation process, which you can still do with an adult. It just takes a bit longer and it's a little bit more difficult. So that's being run by two organisations together, British Veterinary Behaviour Association and Dogs Trust. If you Google dog-friendly practice, it'll take you on to the application process. It's very easy and not expensive. And its aim is very much to encourage practices to think about that ladder of aggression and the fact that dogs are not terribly comfortable in practice, and we need to help them to cope with what's going on. And we do some pretty unpleasant things. Intranasal vaccines, for instance, are a case in point, but dogs can be trained to take those quite happily. So in summary then, that ladder of aggression that I showed you, you can Google it, it's there very easily to download, and think about the bits at the bottom. You know, the recognition that these dogs are uncomfortable and modifying the way that you behave as a result of that. And of course, the result, if you've got much less unhappy dogs, is you're much less likely to get bitten. The dogs will be much happier coming to see you. And we all know how much easier it is to deal with a dog that walks in wagging its tail, coming to say hello, rather than the dog that has to be dragged into your consulting room. The law is complex. It's a complete mess at the moment. Sadly, it doesn't look at the moment as if we're going to get much change, although there was a DEFRA working party looking at how we could improve Dangerous Dogs Act, but I fear it's been overtaken by events. And above all, prevention is better than cure. What we want to do is to allow these dogs to live a good life, where they're happy, where they're not feeling stressed because of what has to be done to them. And that we have a big part as the veterinary profession to play in doing all of that. So it is a complicated subject, and it's very much both social and veterinary, and we need to make the two work together to improve the situation. So that's all I have to say. I have to show this picture just because the two dogs are mother and daughter, and Prudence the cat thought that would be a nice spot to sleep. Not posed, I promise you. She just thought that was a nice warm spot. So Maureen, I'll hand back to you for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. I think Alina is gonna deal with the question, if there are any in the chat, because I can't see it. So over to you, Alina.
Thank you. Yeah, feel free to pop any questions in the Q&A channel. We've got one at the moment. So this question, Chris, is the XL Bully appears to be the kind of dog that should never have been created due to its power. So how can we deal with the emergence of breeds like this, which may have been created with the aim of being dangerous and are used by criminals? If we don't ban them, what can we do about them?
That is the $64,000 question, isn't it? The issue, as I said earlier, I think the issue is a social one. So I don't think there is a simple answer. The issue is why these youngsters, and they are largely youngsters, feel that they have to take this big aggressive dog out for their protection, or to show that they're macho and aggressive themselves. Simply banning them, there are, I'm sure, an awful lot of perfectly nice XL bullies out there. So simply banning them actually will encourage some of these people to go and get one, because look at me, I've got a banned dog. That's exactly what happened with pit bull terriers. Even though you couldn't breed from one which said it was a pit bull terrier, you could create one by crossbreeding other breeds. So I don't have a simple answer. The sort of things that the DEFRA party were looking at, and things that have been tried in other countries. The Swiss at one stage required dog owners to have done a training course and have passed a competence test before they were allowed to get a dog. This is going back into the 90s. And they found that it was completely ineffective, because the responsible people did the training, passed the course, and went and got a dog. The irresponsible people, and they're largely the people that we're talking about now, didn't bother and just went off and got themselves an XL bully or whatever else breed they fancied at the time. And this, you know, this is ear cropping as well, comes into this, doesn't it? It makes the dog look more aggressive. So that's been tried and didn't work, and Swiss society, dare I say it, is probably more better at following rules than British society is. We seem to be very good at trying to find our way round a rule when there is one. So that's been tried. Banning breeds has been tried and doesn't work. So the answer is better training of young puppies. It's better use of behaviorists and trainers. And one of my hobby horses is that there are an awful lot of people out there who call themselves behaviorists and trainers who've done no or minimal training and know nothing about training by reward, know nothing about how to get a dog to do something or not do something without using aversion yourself. And you can reel the names off. You'll have seen them on the internet. Caesar Milan, the Dog Daddy, all of those people who, if you watch their videos, a significant proportion of them end up with the trainer being bitten because they were actually just simply being aggressive and with these dogs and aversive. So we need somehow to stop people like that calling themselves trainers and behaviorists. And we need to encourage people to go off and get properly trained about how to train by reward, how to teach a dog training class so that the dogs actually learn and learn in an environment where it's conducive to do that. And sadly, there are not enough people out there who do that at the moment. Now, there are a number of things going on that might help to improve that situation. One is the Animal Behaviour and Training Council, and I declare an interest here because I'm a trustee. The Animal Behaviour and Training Council has set standards for 4 levels of behaviourists and trainer. The animal trainer, who just treats an animal one-to-one, doesn't matter what species it is. We've got quite a lot of zoo animal trainers who teach tigers to hold their legs out to have blood samples taken by reward. An animal training instructor who runs a dog class, an animal behaviour technician, many of whom are veterinary nurses, who will work under the direction of a clinical animal behaviourist. And the clinical animal behaviourist will deal with any of these issues, whether it's aggression, whether it's separation related behaviours, across the whole spectrum. To be a CAB, you have to well, there are 2 ways in, but most people go in by doing a degree in an MSc, but there's also a way in by what's called accredited prior education and learning. So if you've done a lot of courses and a lot of training, and again, vets and nurses, of course, have done many of these things already, you can get in that way. There is a practical competence test at the end of it. And that's the only organisation that does a practical competence test at the end of it. We need more of people registered down that route so that they can teach the owner what they should or shouldn't do. There is also the other issue now, which has come up in the last couple of years, is the pandemic puppies, and I'm sure you'll have heard about that. And there's no question that some of this recent increase in aggression is because of poor socialization, habituation of those puppies that were born during lockdown, when they were not allowed out of the house, basically, perhaps allowed out for a walk, but not allowed to socialize because the people were not allowed to socialize. And of course, they've all now missed that habituation period, socialization, and so they're all going to have some difficulty with that. And there's a big training issue in there as well. So it was a very long answer to a very short question.
Great, thank you. There's another question here. Not sure if you can answer this one, but it's how well is the dangerously out of control part of the Act actually enforced?
Not. The fact that there are those hundreds of thousands of people going to hospital to be treated for dog bites a year, there are nothing like as many cases of dangerously out of control, which by definition, one should lead to the other. So there is a big gap there because, of course, you have to report it. Then the police have to pick it up, and it's police matter to deal with it, not local authorities. So the whole enforcement system is not particularly good. And of course, all of that misses out dog on dog aggression. So you taking your dog to the park and it gets badly chewed up by another dog, there is no remedy unless you were feeling that the dog was likely to bite you as well. So enforcement is poor, but as with many of these bits of legislation, it all comes down to enforcement if it's really going to work properly.
And just another question about the Dangerous Dog Act, whether it includes any educational measures. Are you aware of any law at all, either within or outside of the UK, that focuses on public education, or do they all focus primarily on punishment?
Interestingly, the Control of Dogs Act Scotland does have something in there. That was introduced in the late noughties into the Scottish Parliament and was passed. And essentially, what that says, in crude terms, is if this dog is showing aggression, the local authority can issue an order to say you've got to do a number of things, and one of those things could be going to a training class, going to an approved trainer. So in principle, that's actually quite a good bit of legislation. But unfortunately, we go back to the enforcement bit, and what it required was local authorities to have a trained officer who could look at these dogs and assess their behaviour, and then refer them, if necessary, to further training and behavioural advice. And as always with these things, the legislation was passed, no money went with it. The local authorities haven't got any money, so local authorities effectively ignored it. So although the legislation is quite good because it probably wasn't properly enforced, it really didn't get anywhere at all. I cited that Swiss legislation, which required people to be trained before they got a dog, and as I say, that didn't work at all. The Scandinavians, I don't think, have tried anything like that. And the Scandinavians tend to follow legislation fairly thoroughly. So no, there isn't any good example that we could build on.
Okay. Just going back to the nature of breeds. Sorry. Oh yes. So yeah, the breed characteristics. There's a question here saying Springers are bred to run and Labradors are bred to swim. This is due to their DNA. Bully dogs have been bred to fight, so presumably this is in their DNA, and assuming that this cannot be completely trained out of the dog, just like you can't train a Springer to be a lap dog, for example. Would you agree with this?
To a certain extent, yes. There's great debate about nature and nurture. How much is genetic and how much is the way that the dog is brought up. And there is 20% perhaps might be genetic. There are two issues here. I think there was some interesting research done in the US about a decade ago where they surveyed what the most aggressive dogs were. And if you want to guess what the most aggressive dog was, it was a Yorkshire Terrier. Now, there is a huge difference between being bitten by a Yorkshire Terrier and being bitten by an American Bulldog or an XL Bully or whatever, one of the large breeds. So physical size plays a part in this, which is obviously genetic, but also you're right that there is some influence of genetics in behavior, and you can't deny that. But with good training, it's situational, isn't it? If you don't put a well-trained dog in a situation where the only way that it can respond is to be aggressive, then you don't have the problem. And so training and behavior of the owner again, you know, if I would never walk my dog through a field of sheep unless she was on a lead, because I know she would chase them. And I could go on forever trying to train her out of that, and I would never be 100% sure that she wouldn't chase sheep. So don't take her in with the sheep, or if you do, put her on a lead. And exactly the same, if you've got a big dog like that, it doesn't matter whether it's an XL bully or a Rottweiler or any of these big breeds. Don't put them in a situation where their only possible response is aggression, because you can wind any dog up eventually and it will bite somebody. If my Goldie got run over, God forbid, and broke her femur, if I went and tweaked her back leg, it wouldn't be unsurprising if she turned around and bit me. So it's circumstantial as well as breeding, and so it is the relationship. It comes back to the social thing again.
And another question about educating young people. What are your thoughts on the impact of that if there were outreach groups or school education programs to try and change people's views on how to be around dogs? Do you think this would be effective, or is there any evidence of existing programs showing that it's effective?
Yes, they are effective. And there are things that I would like to put in the national curriculum. Animal welfare is one of them, and this is a sort of offshoot of that, isn't it? How you relate to animals. And yes, I would love to see training for children around dogs. Kennel Club have got some really good stuff on their website. They run some courses. There are lots of other welfare organisations doing the same. And yes, it would help, but I would still never leave a young child with a dog without it being supervised, because you just don't know what that child's going to do, and you don't know how the dog is going to react. So yes, we need to train the humans as well as the dogs. And while we're training the children to react sensibly around a dog, we can also train them to do some of the other stuff about socialization of puppies and all of those other things that I've talked about. Because when they grow up and get dogs, they need to know what they're supposed to be doing with their dogs as well. And I think there's a big bit here for the veterinary professions, nurses and vets, about talking to clients about what dog to get, how to rear it, and all of those sort of things. And I would love it if every veterinary practice provided a free consultation, pre-purchase, preferably, for somebody who's thinking of getting a dog, and free puppy parties after they've got the dog, because that has huge benefits for the dog, has huge benefits for the practice as well, because you're going to see suitable dogs with suitable people that are habituated to where you're working. So I'd like it to written into the modus operandi of every practice that you do those things.
Excellent, thank you. I think we are at time. Should we do one more question, Maureen, or?
If we have time, well, maybe if people feel like they can stay for another question, because there were quite a few questions, and sorry, because we can't go through them all. But maybe this question got lots of likes, so maybe that means that people want to have it answered. So I'm just reading it. So if they're banning dogs because of the social issues, doesn't it mean with time more and more dog breeds will get banned, because the legislation doesn't focus on dealing with bad people or criminals, gangs, but on removing a dog that those people use from the public? someone wants to use a dog as a sign of their power status, etc., they will get another scary-looking dog to do that. So the legislation is essentially not beneficial for anyone, neither the dog or the public. Not sure what the question, but then yes, the question was, doesn't it mean with time more and more dog breeds will get banned? What do you think, Chris?
Simple one-word answer. Yes, unless we educate politicians. It's the politicians we need to educate about, the consequences of what they're doing.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I think that's the end of this webinar. Thank you to everyone who has joined. I hope it was interesting and helpful and also useful for you. So you still have, don't forget to engage with AWF. You have our website here and our email address if you want to send us an email or keep in touch. Thank you so much, Chris. That was a fantastic presentation. And we wish you all a great day, and we hopefully see you soon. Oh, yes, and we will send you the recording of this webinar afterwards, so you should have it by the end of this week. So thank you again. Have a good day, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.